Peace. The divine is not a being, but being itself. The divine is not a being, but being itself. Part 1. Beloved, gather close. Gather in the hush before the word, in the breath before breath, in the trembling place where the world leans in to listen. Because today we are stepping into a mystery older than language, deeper than doctrine, wider than the sky that arches over us. Today we are stepping into the truth that has been whispering through every age, every prophet, every wound, every wonder. And the truth is this: the divine is not a being, but being itself. Not a being, not one more creature among creatures, not one more presence among presences, not one more voice among the choir of the cosmos. No. The divine is the very song that makes the choir possible. The divine is the breath that makes the voice rise. The divine is the pulse that makes the heart remember it is alive. The divine is not a being. The divine is being. And I know somebody in here has felt it. In the quiet hour when the world fell away. In the moment when grief cracked you open. In the instant when joy lifted you beyond yourself. You felt something that wasn't a person, wasn't an object, wasn't a shape you can hold in your hands. You felt the isness of everything. You felt the I am that is not a name, but a condition of existence. You felt being itself. And I came to tell you today that this is not an accident. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetic flourish. This is the truth that the prophets touched but could not fully speak. This is the truth that the mystics tasted but could not fully swallow. This is the truth that the saints glimpsed in their trembling visions. This is the truth that the Ezran path has been circling like a hawk riding the thermals of revelation. The divine is not a being, but being itself. And if that is true, and I believe it is, then everything changes. Because if the divine is a being, then the divine could be distant. If the divine is a being, then the divine can be absent. If the divine is a being, then the divine can be angry or jealous or small or limited or bound by the same constraints that bind us. But if the divine is being itself, then the divine is the ground beneath your feet. The divine is the breath in your lungs. The divine is the pulse in your wrist. The divine is the ache in your chest. The divine is the spark in your mind. The divine is the trembling in your spirit. The divine is the very fact that you exist. at all. And if the divine is being itself, then you have never been separate. You have never been abandoned. You have never been outside the circle of the holy. You have never been exiled from the presence because you cannot be outside of being. You cannot fall out of existence. You cannot wander beyond the reach of the one who is the very fabric of reality. Now, I know this teaching is big. It stretches the mind. I know it bends the bones. I know it asks you to release the small God you were handed, the God who sits on the throne like a king, the God who watches from a distance, the God who intervenes like a parent scolding a child. But I'm not here to take your God away. I'm here to expand your God. I'm here to unshackle your God. I'm here to unfold your God until the divine is as wide as the sky and as intimate as your own breath. Because the Ezran path does not shrink the holy. The Ezran path does not flatten the mystery. The Ezran path does not reduce the infinite to a manageable shape. The Ezran path says, let God be God. Let being be being. Let the holy be as vast as it truly is. And when you let the divine be being itself, something miraculous happens. You stop searching for God in the heavens and start finding God in the ground. You stop begging for God to come down and start realizing God has never left. You stop imagining God as a distant ruler and start encountering God as the very substance of your existence. You begin to understand that every breath is a prayer. Every heartbeat is a hymn. Every moment of existence is a sacrament. Because if the divine is being itself, then to exist is to be held. To exist is to be known. To exist is to be loved. And I know somebody in here needs to hear that. Because somebody has been carrying the weight of unworthiness. Somebody has been told they are too broken, too strange, too wounded, too complicated, too much, or not enough. Somebody has been told they must earn the love of the divine, must prove themselves worthy, must climb some ladder of righteousness to reach the holy. But hear me. If the divine is being itself, then you are already inside the holy. You are already woven into the fabric of the sacred. You are already held in the arms of the infinite. You don't have to climb. You don't have to earn. You don't have to prove. You don't have to perform. You only have to be. Because being is the sanctuary. Being is the altar. Being is the holy ground. Being is the place where the divine and the human meet. And when you understand that, when you let that truth settle into your bones, when you let it echo through the chambers of your spirit, something begins to shift. You begin to walk differently. You begin to breathe differently. You begin to pray differently. You begin to love differently. You begin to see the world not as a battlefield of competing wills, but as a living tapestry of being unfolding itself in infinite forms. You begin to see the divine in the stranger. You begin to see the divine in the enemy. You begin to see the divine in the wounded places of your own heart. You begin to see the divine in the rising and the falling, the breaking and the healing, the dying and the being born again. Because if the divine is being itself, then everything that exists is a revelation. Everything that exists is a scripture. Everything that exists is a verse in the great hymn of creation. And that means, hear me now, that means you are a verse. You are a scripture. You are a revelation. You are a living testimony of the divine. Not because you are perfect, not because you are righteous, not because you are holy in the way the world measures holiness, but because you are. And being is holy. Beloved, if the divine is being itself, then we must learn to stand on the ground of our own existence with new eyes. Because too many of us have been taught to distrust our own being. Too many of us have been told that our instincts are sinful, our desires are dangerous, our questions are rebellious, our wounds are shameful, our humanity is a problem to be solved rather than a mystery to be honored. But hear me, if the divine is being itself, then your being is not the enemy. Your being is the doorway. Your being is the place where the holy whispers. Your being is the place where the infinite breathes. Your being is the place where the divine unfolds itself into form. And I know that's hard for some of us to accept because we were raised on a theology of suspicion. Suspicion of the body, suspicion of the mind, suspicion of the heart, suspicion of the self. We were taught that holiness meant shrinking, hiding, denying, suppressing. We were taught that the divine was somewhere else, someone else, something else, always distant, always above, always beyond. But I came to tell you today that the divine is not beyond you. The divine is beneath you. The divine is within you. The divine is the ground that holds you even when you cannot hold yourself. Because if the divine is being itself, then the divine is the very condition that makes your existence possible. The divine is the yes spoken before your first breath. The divine is the let there be that echoes through your bones. The divine is the pulse that keeps time with your heartbeat, the rhythm that carries you through the dark nights and the bright mornings. And if that is true, and I believe it is, then you are not an intruder in the universe. You are not an accident. You are not a mistake. You are not a disruption in the cosmic order. You are an expression of being. You are a manifestation of the holy. You are a living, breathing revelation of the infinite. And I know somebody needs to hear that because the world has tried to convince you otherwise. The world has tried to tell you that you don't belong, that you don't matter, that you are too strange, too broken, too complicated, too wounded to carry the divine. But the world is wrong because the divine does not choose the perfect. The divine chooses the real. The divine chooses the raw. The divine chooses the trembling, the uncertain, the cracked open, the rising again. The divine chooses you. Not because you are flawless, but because you exist. Not because you are righteous, but because you are real. Not because you are strong, but because you are here. And being itself is enough. Now, if the divine is being itself, then we must learn to listen differently. Because too often we listen for a voice that sounds like thunder, or a command that shakes the mountains, or a revelation that splits the sky. But the divine does not always speak in spectacle. The divine speaks in the quiet hum of existence. The divine speaks in the subtle shift of awareness. The divine speaks in the gentle unfolding of your own becoming. The divine speaks in the breath. The divine speaks in the silence. The divine speaks in the ache. The divine speaks in the longing. The divine speaks in the moment you realize you are still here, still breathing, still held. And sometimes, hear me now, sometimes the divine speaks in the wound. Because if the divine is being itself, then the wound is not outside the holy. The wound is a place where being is pressed thin. The wound is a place where the infinite becomes visible. The wound is a place where the divine whispers, I am here, even here, especially here. And I know that's hard. I know that's tender. I know that's dangerous territory. But the Ezran path does not turn away from the wound. The Ezran path does not sanitize the sacred. The Ezran path does not pretend that holiness means the absence of pain. The Ezran path says holiness is the presence of being in the midst of pain. Holiness is the breath that keeps rising even when the world has knocked you down. Holiness is the heartbeat that refuses to stop singing. Holiness is the stubborn, trembling insistence that you are still here, still alive, still part of the great unfolding of the divine. And when you understand that, when you let that truth settle into your spirit, you begin to see your life differently. You begin to see your story not as a series of failures and triumphs, but as a continuous revelation of being. You begin to see your wounds not as disqualifications, but as openings. You begin to see your struggles not as evidence of abandonment, but as invitations to deeper presence. Because if the divine is being itself, then the divine is present in every moment of your existence. Not just the triumphant ones, not just the joyful ones, not just the holy ones as the world defines holiness, but in every moment, every breath, every rise, every fall. The divine is present in the confusion. The divine is present in the doubt. The divine is present in the grief. The divine is present in the longing. The divine is present in the breaking. The divine is present in the healing. The divine is present because the divine is being and you are being, and there is no separation between the two. And so, beloved, the question is not, where is God? The question is, where are you? Are you present to your own being? Are you awake to the ground beneath your feet? Are you listening to the quiet hum of existence? Are you willing to meet the divine in the place where you actually are, not the place where you think you should be? Because the divine is not waiting for you to become perfect. The divine is waiting for you to become present. Present to your breath. Present to your body. Present to your longing. Present to your truth. Present to your being. Because being is the sanctuary. Being is the altar. Being is the holy ground. And the divine is already there. Beloved, if the divine is being itself, then we must confront one of the deepest fears that haunts the human heart. The fear of abandonment. The fear that the holy might turn away. the fear that the presence might withdraw, the fear that the one who made us might one day decide we are no longer worth holding. But hear me, a God who is a being can leave. A God who is a being can withdraw. A God who is a being can hide, can retreat, can step back into the shadows of eternity. But a God who is being itself cannot leave you, cannot abandon you, cannot withdraw from you. Because the divine is the very fabric of your existence. You cannot be abandoned by the one who is your being. You cannot be forsaken by the one who is your breath. You cannot be left behind by the one who is the ground beneath your feet. And I know that some of us have lived through seasons where it felt like God was gone. Seasons where the silence was so heavy it pressed on your chest like a stone. Seasons where the prayers rose but no answer came. Seasons where the grief was so deep it swallowed the light. Seasons where the loneliness echoed louder than any hymn. But I came to tell you today that the silence was not absence. The silence was depth. The silence was being itself, holding you in a way you could not yet understand. Because sometimes the divine speaks in thunder. And sometimes the divine speaks in whisper. And sometimes the divine speaks in silence so vast it becomes a womb. A womb where something new is forming. A womb where something ancient is remembering itself. A womb where your being is being reshaped by the one who is being itself. Now, if the divine is being itself, then the divine is not somewhere else. The divine is not waiting for you in the afterlife. The divine is not hiding in the heavens. The divine is not perched on a throne beyond the stars. The divine is here. The divine is now. The divine is the pulse in your wrist. The divine is the warmth in your chest. The divine is the awareness behind your eyes. The divine is the quiet presence that has been with you in every moment of your life, even the ones you thought you walked through alone. Because being does not abandon being. Existence does not forsake existence. The ground does not step out from beneath your feet. And I know somebody needs to hear that. Somebody who has been carrying the ache of feeling unseen. Somebody who has been carrying the wound of feeling unloved. Somebody who has been carrying the fear that the divine has turned away. But hear me, the divine cannot turn away from you because the divine is the very fact that you are here. The divine is the very fact that you exist. The divine is the very fact that you are breathing this breath in this moment, in this body, in this life. And that means, listen now, that means you have never been outside the holy. Not for one moment, not for one breath, not for one heartbeat. Even when you felt lost, you were held. Even when you felt broken, you were held. Even when you felt unworthy, you were held. Even when you felt abandoned, you were held. Because being itself was holding you. Now, if the divine is being itself, then the divine is not fragile. The divine is not threatened by your questions. The divine is not offended by your doubts. The divine is not shaken by your anger. The divine is not diminished by your confusion. Because being is spacious. Being is vast. Being is wide enough to hold your rage and your reverence, your fear and your faith, your trembling and your triumph. And I want to tell you something that religion doesn't always say out loud. You can bring your whole self to the divine. Not the polished self, not the rehearsed self, not the holy sounding self, not the self you think God wants. Your real self, your raw self, your wounded self, your rising self, your complicated, contradictory, beautiful, broken, becoming self. Because being itself can hold all of you. Being itself can meet you in the truth of who you are. Being itself can embrace you without condition, without hesitation, without fear. And when you let yourself be held, truly held, something begins to shift. You begin to trust the ground beneath your feet. You begin to trust the breath in your lungs. You begin to trust the unfolding of your own life. You begin to trust that you are not alone, not abandoned, not forgotten. Because the divine is not a being who comes and goes. The divine is being itself, the constant, the foundation, the ever-present presence that cannot leave you because it is the very essence of your existence. And so, beloved, the question is not, is God with me? The question is, am I awake to the God who is already here? Am I awake to the presence that has never left? Am I awake to the being that holds my being? Am I awake to the holy that breathes through every moment of my life? Because the divine is not waiting for you to find it. The divine is waiting for you to notice it. Notice the breath. Notice the heartbeat. Notice the ground. Notice the presence. Notice the being that is always, always, always here. Beloved, if the divine is being itself, then we must learn to see the world not as a collection of separate objects, but as a living field of presence. Because too often we walk through life as though everything is divided. Sacred here, secular there, holy there, ordinary there, God here, world there, spirit here, matter there. But if the divine is being itself, then there is no there. There is only here. There is only this. There is only this shimmering presence that fills all things. Because if the divine is being itself, then the divine is not confined to temples or churches or sanctuaries. The divine is not limited to rituals or sacraments or sacred texts. The divine is not restricted to the moments we label holy. The divine is the holiness of existence itself. The divine is the holiness of breath. The divine is the holiness of touch. The divine is the holiness of grief. The divine is the holiness of joy. The divine is the holiness of the ordinary moment that glows with the quiet fire of being. And I know that this is a shift, because we were taught to look for God in the extraordinary. We were taught to look for God in the miracle, the spectacle, the revelation that splits the sky. We were taught to look for God in the places where the world feels thin and the heavens feel close. But hear me. If the divine is being itself, then the divine is not more present in the miracle than in the mundane. The divine is not more present in the revelation than in the routine. The divine is not more present in the sacred than in the ordinary. The divine is equally present in all things, because the divine is the presence of all things. Now, if the divine is being itself, then the world is not a stage on which God occasionally appears. The world is the body of the divine. The world is the expression of the infinite. The world is the unfolding of being into form. And that means, listen now, that means everything is shimmering with the holy. The tree is shimmering. The river is shimmering. The stranger is shimmering. The enemy is shimmering. The womb is shimmering. The breath is shimmering. Because being is shimmering through all things. And when you begin to see that, truly see that, your life begins to change. You begin to walk with reverence. You begin to speak with intention. You begin to listen with tenderness. You begin to move through the world as though every moment is a sanctuary, because it is. You begin to understand that holiness is not a place you visit. Holiness is a way of seeing. Holiness is a way of being. Holiness is the recognition that the divine is not somewhere else. The divine is everywhere. Now, if the divine is being itself, then the divine is not limited by form. The divine is not confined to the shapes we expect. The divine is not bound by the images we create. Because being takes infinite forms. Being expresses itself in infinite ways. Being unfolds itself in infinite shapes. And that means the divine can meet you in ways you never imagined. The divine can meet you in the stranger who speaks a word you didn't know you needed. The divine can meet you in the silence that settles over you like a blanket. The divine can meet you in the grief that cracks your heart open. The divine can meet you in the joy that lifts you beyond yourself. The divine can meet you in the moment you thought was empty, only to discover it was full. Because being itself is always meeting you. Being itself is always revealing itself. Being itself is always unfolding in and through your life. And so, beloved, the question is not, where is God? The question is, where am I not looking? Where have I assumed the divine is absent? Where have I decided the holy cannot be? Where have I closed my eyes to the presence that fills all things? Because the divine is not hiding. The divine is not distant. The divine is not waiting for you to climb some ladder of righteousness. The divine is here. The divine is now. The divine is the ground, the breath, the pulse, the presence. And when you begin to see that, when you begin to feel that, when you begin to trust that, something begins to shift in your spirit. You begin to realize that you are not moving through the world alone. You are moving through the world in the arms of the infinite. You are moving through the world in the presence of the holy. You are moving through the world as a manifestation of being itself. And that means your life is not small. Your life is not meaningless. Your life is not separate from the divine. Your life is a revelation of the divine. Because the divine is not a being who visits your life. The divine is being itself, unfolding as your life.